My name is Barbara Allen, and I am the sixth generation granddaughter of Sojourner Truth. Today, I'm going to read you a book that was based on the story my mom used to tell me when I was a child about Sojourner. It's called Remembering Great Grandma Sojourner Truth. Introduction. Welcome, children. This is a dynamic picture book of the most incredible abolitionist and women's rights leader of all time. You may have heard of her from history classes and a documentary. Still, I know her through family histories and stories handed down through my family. You see, I am Sojourner Truth's great-granddaughter. That is why I refer to her in this book as great-grandma. Great-grandma was born into slavery and sold several times by the age of 13. By the grace of God, she was able to escape the brutality of slavery by the time she was a young woman. Although she was free, she did not take her freedom for granted. Great-grandma traveled throughout the country speaking out against slavery and speaking up for women's rights. When slavery ended, she started working for better conditions for the freed slaves. She continued her work on behalf of women's rights as well. Great-grandma could not read or write, but her words were powerful and helped people even to this day understand slavery's brutality. All people deserve equal and fair treatment, she would always say. Remembering Great-Grandma Sojourner Truth is an exciting children's book of a woman who believed in God and herself. She was determined to survive her adversities and live on to speak the truth. Mommy, I would say to my mother when I was a child, tell me about my great-great-great-great-grandma. Okay, sweetie, my ever-loving, patient mother would say to me. She would smile and tuck me into bed and say in a soft, calming voice, "Now snuggle in." As my mother said to me, I now say to you, snuggle in and take this journey into the life and time of a most remarkable woman, my great-grandma. Great-grandma was born into slavery as Isabella Bumphrey in New York around 1797. Her parents was James and Elizabeth Bumphrey, Mama Bat they called her. They were among many Africans captured from the Golden Coast, currently called Ghana, and brought over to America as slaves. Great-grandma had a large family of 10 brothers and sisters. James and Elizabeth loved their children very much. When it was quiet, they would tell their children about their life in Ghana and the God they worship back home. Does anyone tell you stories about time long ago? Great-grandma's parents would tell her that God loved everyone equally and He would protect her always. Great-grandma loved these stories, and when it was nighttime, she would sneak out and find a quiet place and sing quietly to the full moon sky. She would sing, "Come by here, my Lord, come by here, oh Lord, come by here." Great-grandma always felt that she had more purpose in life than working in the fields. But she was a good girl and she obeyed her parents. Do you obey your parents? As great-grandmother grew older, her siblings were sold one by one to slave owners. She became lonely and scared that she would be next. When great-grandma was 9 years old, her worst fears happened. She was taken away from her parents and put on the auction block to be sold with a flock of sheep to an Englishman named John Neely. Have you ever thought about what it would be like to be taken away from your parents? Perhaps now is an excellent time to give your parents a hug and let them know how much you love them. Great-grandma was very afraid. She had never been away from her parents and she only spoke Dutch, so she could not understand what anyone was saying. On the ride home to Mr. Neely's house, she began to sing silently. Come by here, my Lord, come by here. Oh Lord, come by here, until she fell asleep. Since great-grandma spoke only Dutch and did not understand English, she would get into trouble and making mistakes. Mrs. Neely would slap her often. One day, Mr. Neely took her out to the barn and beat great-grandmother so severely that she passed out on the ground. When she regained consciousness, she was covered in blood, sweat, and tears. She heard a voice say, "I am here, my child. I am here." This gave great-grandma the strength to make it through another day. Not long after that terrible beating, great-grandmother's father came to visit. She was so happy when she saw him. She said, "Papa, Papa," she cried. Great-grandma's father was concerned about her. She looked so tired and fragile, while James, her father, appeared old and worn. They both put their worries aside and embraced each other for hours. Great-grandmother asked her father, "How is Mama Bats?" Her father said, "Doing well." But that was not true. Mama Bats was quite ill and fragile. Great-grandma and her father sat underneath an old oak tree and talked and talked. She asked her father to tell her about God in Ghana. He told her the same story he always had. God loves everyone equally and is still beside you. Trust in His power and He will see you through. That gave great-grandma comfort. Shortly after that, a man named Martin Shriver, a friend of James, purchased great-grandma and moved her to his property. For 2 years, great-grandma lived with the Shrivers. She grew tall and strong. She looked very much like her father. Great-grandma worked hard most days. She had to upload the fishing boat, plant and hold corn in the field, and work in the Shrivers Tavern. While great-grandmother was living at the Shrivers, she found out both of her parents had died. First Mama Beth and then Papa James. Great-grandma was sad, but happy they were finally resting with the Lord. One day, a man came into the Shrivers Tavern, and upon seeing great-grandma, wanted to buy her for 3 times what the Shrivers had paid for her. His name was John Dumont. Though he liked great-grandma, Mr. Shriver could not resist such an attractive offer. So he sold great-grandma for $300, which was a lot of money in those days. Great-grandma labored on the Dumont's farm. Mr. Dumont always boasted that great-grandma worked harder than any male slave. Great-grandma was around 13 years old and 6 feet tall. Some observers said despite great-grandma being a slave, she looked and carried herself like an African queen. Can you name any African queens? Around 1817, Mr. Dumont decided great-grandma, now around 20 years of age, needed a husband. He picked one of his field slaves named Thomas. How would you feel if someone picked your husband or wife for you? Of course, it is necessary to point out that Mr. Dumont's concern was not for great-grandma. His interest was in great-grandma having children which he could sell, and in so doing, improve his profits. One year later, great-grandma and Thomas had a daughter named Diane, which in that next 10 years they had 4 more children. Elizabeth, named after great-grandmother's mother, Hannah, Peter, and Sophia. In 1817, a new law was passed in New York State. Slaves born before July 4th, 1799 had to be freed by July 4th, 1827, which meant great-grandmother and her husband would be released in about 10 years. Better yet, Dumont promised that he would free great-grandma and Thomas earlier if great-grandma worked extra hard in the coming year. Great-grandma began to work extra hard. She worked in the field planting crops and in the house washing clothes, cooking, cleaning, and making clothes. One day, while great-grandma was in the field, she cut her hand on a sharp tool. She was determined to get free, so she wrapped her hand and continued to work hard. When it became time for Mr. Dumont to free great-grandma and Thomas, he changed his mind. He did not feel that great-grandma had worked hard enough with an injured hand. Great-grandma could not wait any longer. She woke up early one morning, packed up a pillowcase, picked up her youngest daughter, and walked away from slavery. She left her other children with Thomas. Great-grandma met many interesting people along the way who were nice to her and Sophia and gave them refuge in their home. Great-grandma began to preach the word of the Lord, and one day she heard the Lord say, "Journey throughout the land and preach the truth." Great-grandma heeded the call, changed her name to Sojourner Truth, and made plans to start her journey. Sojourner spent years preaching at women's rights conference and outdoor church meetings. She met many influential people like William Lloyd Garrison, Frederick Douglass, Susan B. Anthony, and even President Lincoln. Sojourner was true to her name and faithful to her God. After many years, my great-great-great-grandma found her way to Battle Creek, Michigan with her daughter Sophia to live out the rest of her life. Wow, Mommy, that was a great story. Tell me again how she is my great-grandmother. Well, Barbara, Sojourner Truth married Thomas Schuler. They had a daughter named Fanny, and she married Frank Leachy, who later changed the family name to Malici. He had a son, Thomas McLeachy, which was my great-grandfather. His daughter, Juanita, gave birth to me, and I gave birth to a special little girl who is you. Then my mother said, "I want you to always remember you are connected to an incredibly special person." Your great-grandmother risked her life leaving that morning with her daughter Sophia so that one day you would have a life of freedom and opportunity. So, my child, shine your light on the world and always honor her legacy. She then kissed me on the cheek as she was leaving the room. I began to sing, "Kumbaya, my Lord, Kumbaya, oh Lord, Kumbaya," until I fell asleep.